Alright, I'm discussing question number 5 of quiz 4. This is not a relatively poorly done question. This question requires us to actually has both a demand shock and a supply shock. And that's probably one of the reasons that some of us don't know how to solve this type of question. But actually, for both types of shocks, as long as we understand what's the effect of a supply shock, what's the effect of a demand shock, then if we have both shocks, then the combination of these two types of shocks. So they all wind up of either type of shocks. So let me quickly explain what's the demand shock. So bear with me for my not so beautiful drawing because I'm just using my mouse for a very quick drawing. So the vertical axis is the price, and obviously demand curve should be downward sloping, and the supply curve should be upward sloping. So this is the supply and this is demand. So suppose we have a positive demand shock. By positive, I mean that probably for some reason the people start to increase their demand for a certain product. So that in terms of this graph, this will move the demand curve to the right. So we will have a rightward shift of the demand curve. So even without drawing this chart, once we have a positive demand shock, immediately I believe it should be quite intuitive to understand that the price should go up, right? If more people demand the same product, then the price is going to be driven up. And what about the quantity? The quantity will also increase, right? Because the producers will produce more to meet the demand. And that's exactly what happens here. Look at the original equilibrium point and the new equilibrium point. So this is the E1 and this is the E2. So compared with E1, E2, the new equilibrium has both a higher price and a higher quantity. So that's as expected. And conversely, if we have a negative demand shock, which means that somehow people start to decrease their demand, then exactly opposite effects should take place, right? So the D prime here, we have a new equilibrium is right here. We have a E3. So compared with E1, E3 has both a lower price and a lower quantity. So that's a demand shock. And what about supply shock? So let me draw this, quickly draw a new chart to understand what's the likely effect of a supply shock. So all this, I'm just trying to explain what's the effect of a combination of these two. So supply curve slopes upward and demand curve slopes downward. So if we have a positive supply shock, which means that for some reason the producers start to produce more given other factors. So even without drawing the chart, we will be able to understand that if producers produce more, hence there are more products on the market, but the demand remains the same. So the only way to clear the market, which means that the demand will equal to the supply, is to make the price to go down. Hence the price has to go down. And what about the quantity? And because we have more products on the market, we should expect the quantity to increase. So a positive supply shock will drive up the price and we drive down the price, and at the same time drive up the quantity. So that's the negative effect of a positive supply shock. So let's confirm whether that's the case with this graph. So again, I want to stress here that I strongly encourage you to think about intuition behind a question after you have done the exercise, and before you attempt a question, think about the basic intuition for what's going to happen, and then use the chart to either confirm or refute what's the likely intuition in your mind. I think that's a very good habit. So S prime, that's the new supply curve. So in terms of the equilibrium point, originally we were here, E1, and for the new equilibrium, E2. And price, you can see, compared with E1, price goes down. And what about the quantity? Quantity goes up, right, compared with E1. So that's as expected. And conversely, if we have a negative supply shock, so S double prime, then exactly the opposite effect should take place. We should have a higher price and lower quantity. So with that in mind, let me go back to the question here. Basically, it says, let me quickly read the setup. Petroleum prices affect the aluminum market in two ways. From a demand perspective, petroleum prices have a direct impact on the cost of plastics, a substitute for aluminum. From a supply perspective, producing aluminum is a highly energy-intensive process. Petroleum prices are an input to the cost of production for aluminum production and thus have a direct impact on the cost of aluminum production. In a supply and demand diagram, show how an increase in petroleum prices affects the demand curve and the supply curve for aluminum. Consider the market for aluminum illustrated in the figure to the right. Number one, using the line drawing tool, graph a new demand curve for aluminum. Label this curve D2. So what direction is the demand shock here? The setup says that the petroleum prices affect both the demand and the supply. And in terms of the demand, petroleum prices have a direct impact on a substitute for aluminum. So if the petroleum prices go up, the price of the substitute go up. If the price for a product goes up, the demand should go down. Right? So if the demand for a substitute go down, we should expect the price of this product, which we are considering here, we should expect the demand for this product to go up. So that's a very understandable logic. Hence, we actually have a positive demand shock here. So in terms of the chart, and with this positive supply shock, demand shock, as we explained in this graph here, if we have a positive demand shock, both the price and the quantity should go up. So that's the likely effect of that. But that's only by the demand shock. And here we also have a supply shock, because the petroleum prices also affect the supply side of this market. And in what direction? Here it says producing aluminum is highly energy intensive process. So petroleum prices is also one factor in the cost of production for aluminum. So if that factor price go up, we should expect the supply to go down given other factors. Right, so the supply should have a negative impact based on the setup. So let me draw a negative, shift the supply to the left. Suppose it's like this way. Okay, so this is a new supply. So if we don't have a demand shock and we don't have a supply shock here, since it's a negative supply shock, going back to the chart, if we have a negative supply shock, we should expect the price to go up and the quantity to go down. And if you only have a demand shock without a supply shock, we should expect the price to go up and the quantity to go up. So you see that the supply shock, the positive demand shock, and the negative supply shock will both drive up the price. But the negative supply shock will drive down the quantity, but the positive demand shock will drive up the quantity. Hence, the price will unambiguously go up. That's no doubt. But what about the quantity? In this case, actually, it cannot be determined because the supply shock and the demand shock, they have a directly opposite effect to each other. So without other knowledge, we simply cannot determine what's the net effect of these two types of shocks on the price on the quantity. So answering that question, the following question here. Oh, we're not done here yet. We just draw the demand curve and the supply, new demand and supply curves, but we haven't done the new equilibrium point. So equilibrium is the intersection between these two lines, and that's E2. And some of you will think that here, obviously, E2 is to the left of E1. Hence, you might answer that the quantity will go down. But that's very subjective because here I'm just drawing the demand and the supply curves very arbitrarily. So if you change, suppose I change the supply curve. Let me change the supply curve. Let me delete this supply curve and this equilibrium point and draw another supply curve. Okay, in this case, the supply doesn't move that much compared with demand, even though it all decreases, but doesn't decrease that much. Suppose the new supply curve is right here. Okay, so you can see that actually in this case, the new equilibrium now is to the right of the old one. So the quantity now increases. So that's the reason we said it's undetermined. So the new equilibrium price of aluminum should be unambiguously higher, and the new equilibrium quantity of aluminum should be indeterminate. So now let's check our answer. Your input is correct.